You are pulling out your summer tomatoes right now and looking at those empty beds and thinking the season is basically over. I understand that feeling. I had it myself for the first several years I grew food. Summer winds down, the tomatoes slow, the heat starts to break, and something in your brain says we are done until next spring. That instinct is costing you months of fresh food every single year. Fall harvests do not begin in September, they begin in August. And if you are watching this in August, you are right at the edge of the most important planting window of the second half of the year. I am going to give you 7 crops you can put in the ground right now that will feed you well into winter. Some of them will still be producing when there is frost on the ground. But I need you to pay attention to the timing, because a few of these have a hard deadline coming up fast. Stay with me. My grandfather had a saying he repeated every August without fail. He would look at whatever I was planting and ask the same question. He would say, "Walter, what is that going to look like in October? Not tomorrow, not next week, October." He was trying to teach me that fall gardening is a different mental game from spring gardening. In spring, you plant and you watch things grow in front of you, and the feedback is fast and encouraging. In fall, you plant in heat and you wait, and the reward comes weeks later when the air is cool and the days are shorter, and the thing you put in the ground back in August is suddenly ready. You are planting for a future version of your garden. That shift in thinking is the whole lesson of this video. Every crop I'm about to give you needs to go in the ground now, not when it feels like fall, not when the air cools down and it seems like the right moment. Now, because by the time it feels like fall planting weather, you are already 3 weeks behind where you need to be. Crop number 1 is spinach. Spinach is one of the most cold-hardy vegetables you can grow, and it is one of the most timing-sensitive crops in the fall garden. Here is why August planting matters specifically for spinach. Spinach needs to reach a reasonable size before the days get really short and cold. Once the day length drops below a certain point, the plant essentially pauses its growth. If the plant is already a decent size by then, it will hold through cold weather and continue producing slowly. If it is still small when that happens, you end up with plants that sit there, not dying, but also not giving you anything to eat. The mistake most gardeners make is waiting until it feels cool enough to plant. By that point, the growing window before short days arrive has shrunk considerably. My method is to direct sow spinach in the last 2 weeks of August in most zones. I soak the seeds for a few hours before planting. Spinach seed can be sluggish to germinate in warm soil, and the soak helps. I plant into beds that have been watered deeply the night before. I cover the seeds with a thin layer of fine compost, rather than the regular garden soil which can crust over and block germination. Plant spinach this week, wait until September, and you will get plants that survive winter but never really produce a harvest worth talking about. Crop number 2 is lettuce. Lettuce has a reputation as a spring crop, and most gardeners never try it in fall. That is a mistake, because fall lettuce is genuinely better than spring lettuce in several ways. The cooling temperatures as the season progresses mean fall lettuce stays sweet and tender, much longer than spring lettuce, which is always racing toward the heat that makes it bitter. The challenge with fall lettuce is that you are starting seeds when the soil is still warm from summer. Lettuce seed has a phenomenon called heat dormancy, where it will not germinate reliably above about 80 degrees soil temperature. The solution is simple. Start lettuce seeds in the afternoon or evening when temperatures are dropping. Water with cool water if you can. Provide some shade over the seedbed for the first week. I use a floating row cover loosely draped over the bed. It cuts the direct sun intensity without blocking the light entirely. Once the seeds germinate, the plants are usually fine. It is just getting them to germinate in warm soil that requires a little attention. Lettuce planted now will be harvestable in October and will produce well into November in most zones. Plant it this week. September lettuce plantings often struggle to size up before the hardest frosts arrive. Crop number 3 is radishes. If you have never had a fall harvest and you want to build your confidence and see fast results, radishes are where you start. Most varieties are ready to harvest in 25 to 30 days. You plant them now. You are eating them in September while everything else is still developing. That quick turnaround does something important. It proves to you that the fall garden works. It gives you something to show for the August effort while you wait for everything else to come in. Fall radishes are also better than spring radishes in my experience. The cooling temperatures make them crisper and less sharp than radishes that mature in summer heat. Direct sow them about ½ an inch deep, thin to 2 inches apart once they sprout, and keep the soil consistently moist. They need almost no attention beyond that. Plant radishes this week. They are so fast that even a late August planting gives you a full harvest before conditions get difficult. Crop number 4 is kale. Here is something about kale that surprises people every time I mention it. Kale that has been touched by frost tastes better than kale that has not. The cold converts some of the starches in the leaves to sugars. The same plant that tasted slightly bitter and tough in October becomes noticeably sweeter and more tender in November after a few cold nights. Kale is also one of the most cold-hardy vegetables in the entire garden. Depending on your variety and zone, kale will continue producing through temperatures that would kill almost anything else. Some varieties will survive through a genuine hard freeze if given a little protection. The key is getting the plants to a good size before the serious cold arrives. A kale plant that goes into winter small and underdeveloped is far more vulnerable than one that has had enough time to establish a strong root system and substantial leaf mass. Plant kale now, and it will be harvesting size by the time the first light frosts arrive. You will be able to harvest outer leaves through October and November and into December in most zones. Plant kale this week. A September planting in most zones will give you small plants that barely survive winter, rather than productive plants that feed you through it. Crop number 5 is beets. Beets are one of those crops that actually prefer to develop in cooling soil. The roots size up beautifully as the temperatures drop. Beets planted in August will be developing their roots through September and October when the soil is doing exactly what beet roots want. The other thing about beets that most gardeners underuse is the greens. You are not just growing a root vegetable, you are growing a 2-harvest crop. Young beet greens can be harvested when the plants are 4 to 5 inches tall. You thin the row at that point, eat the thinnings as salad greens, and leave the remaining plants to develop full roots. The spacing matters more than most people realize for beets. Overcrowded beets produce small, poorly shaped roots. Thin them aggressively to 3 to 4 inches apart, and you will get proper roots. Plant beets this week. Beet roots need enough time in the soil to develop fully, and a late planting in most zones produces small, underdeveloped roots that are more frustrating than rewarding. Crop number 6 is turnips. Turnips are one of the most underrated vegetables in the fall garden, and I think they have an image problem. People assume they are a survival crop, something you eat when there is nothing else. That is not accurate. A fresh turnip pulled from the garden in October or November, roasted simply, is completely different from the turnips most people have encountered. They are also one of the most forgiving crops in the fall garden. They tolerate a range of soil conditions, they develop quickly, and they store well in the ground or in a root cellar situation. Most varieties are ready in about 60 days. Like beets, the greens are also edible and nutritious. You can harvest turnip greens throughout the season and still get roots at the end. Turnips handle frost well and actually improve in flavour after a light freeze for the same reason as kale. The cold improves the sweetness. Plant turnips this week. They need those 60 days to develop fully, and a September planting cuts into that window, considerably depending on when your first hard frost typically arrives. Crop number 7 is Swiss chard. Swiss chard is the most generous plant in my fall garden. You plant it once and you harvest from it for months. You do not pull the whole plant. You cut outer leaves as you need them, and the plant keeps producing new leaves from the centre. A single planting of Swiss chard established now will give you harvests through October, November, and in many zones well into December. It handles light frost without complaint, and with a little protection from a row cover, it will push well past what most cold season crops can handle. The other thing Swiss chard does well is tolerate partial shade, better than most vegetables. If you have a bed that does not get full sun all day, Swiss chard is your best choice for fall production. Direct sow it now about 1/2 inch deep and thin to 6 inches between plants once it sprouts. Plant Swiss chard this week. A late planting gives you plants that are too small to harvest from before the hardest cold arrives, and you lose the months of continuous production. That is the whole point of growing it. Now, I want to show you something that illustrates the timing point better than any explanation can. Imagine 2 beds side by side, same seeds, same soil, same amount of water and attention. One planted in the last week of August, one planted 18 days later, in the middle of September. In the August bed, by mid-October, you have full-sized spinach leaves ready to harvest, lettuce heads forming nicely, kale plants with established root systems and good leaf mass, beets visibly sizing up in the soil. In the September bed, on that same October day, you have seedlings, small, underdeveloped, behind in every way. Some of them will still produce something, but the gap in production is not small. It is the difference between a bed that feeds your family through fall and a bed that gives you enough for a side dish or two before the cold shuts it down. 18 days. That is what is at stake right now. The August planting window is not permanent. It has a closing date, and that date is coming whether you plant or not. Every week you wait is a week. Your fall crops will not have to develop before the cold arrives. Every empty bed sitting in your garden right now is a missed meal sometime in October or November. I know it does not feel like planting season. The heat is still there. The summer crops are still winding down. Your brain is telling you the year is almost over. Your garden is telling you something different. Get seeds in the ground this week. Even if you only have time for one bed, one crop, one small area cleared out from something that has finished producing. Start there. The fall garden rewards early action more than almost anything else in a growing season. And next year, when you are harvesting kale in November and pulling beets in October, while everyone else is waiting for spring, you will remember that the decision that made it possible was the one you made in August. If you planted something after watching this, leave a comment and tell me what you put in and what zone you are in. I read every one of them, and I want to know how the fall season goes for you. Subscribe if you want the follow-up video on how to extend these crops even further into winter with simple, low-cost protection that most gardeners never try. The season is not over. It is just changing direction.